Before beginning the address of Dr. Aparajita ma'am, I'll be glad to give a very short brief about Red Lantern Analytica as well as the guest speaker for our session. Red Lantern Analytica is an international affairs observer group researching upon critical issues related to world geopolitics, and we have a special focus on Sino-India relations apart from the rest of the world. And with the guest speaker of today's session, I'd like to welcome Dr. Aparajita Pandey. And she has done her master's and doctorate in Latin American and Caribbean political sciences. And she has also been an assistant professor at Amity University. Currently, she is a senior research associate at Showtime Consulting. And today she will be taking this session and will be giving an interesting account on the advent of I2U2. With your permission, ma'am, we can now begin this session, and we'll be taking questions at the end of the session, like I already mentioned. And this session is also being live streamed on Facebook and our YouTube channel as well. So
Okay,
over to you, ma'am.
great. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Red Lantern Analytica for calling me, and to all the audience here for taking time out on your Sunday and coming here for the session. So then I'll jump straight into what the topic talks about, which is the advent of I2U2 and also minilateralism. Now, before I go into what minilateralism is or why I2U2 is important, we have to look at the concept of regional organizations. And when we talk about regional organizations, I think the easiest point of beginning is to think about the EU, the European Union. Now, the European Union has always been an organization that has been considered the hallmark of what you call regional organizations for everyone. Okay. Now, when we talk about the European Union and we see where it started, what were the beginnings, you see that it was born out of the devastation of the two world wars that Europe went through. And the rationale behind a union or a regional organization was that it would stop the advent of the so-called militant nationalism, xenophobia, because Europe had seen what happens when you have xenophobia or when you have extreme amount of patriotism. It leads to wars, that leads to destruction. Now that was the thought process behind European Union. And when European Union came together, much like most regional organizations, it had a political agenda which became economic. Or the other ways round is that other regional organizations usually have an economic agenda which becomes political later. So if we talk about what used to be NAFTA or the North American Free Trade Association, which had Canada, US, and Mexico at one point of time, it was an economic organization or economic regional organization that evolved to have political connotations later. Now, the reason why these regional organizations become important is because they give you many global platforms. When I say many global platforms, everything cannot be taken to the WTO. Everything cannot be discussed in the Security Council or in the General Assembly of the UN. So, what you do is you have organizations which have member states which have common interests. Either they come from a common past and share a common future, or they have territorial commonalities, geographical commonalities, or they have common interests. Now, for a very long time, regional organizations meant that you had to have a geographical cohesion. You could only be a regional organization if you were geographically proximate to each other. Am I clear? Can everybody hear me properly? Okay. So why is geographical proximity important? Because that already ties you in a common thread. So if you have ASEAN countries, for example, they are all close to each other geographically. The first and foremost exception to that rule is what we call BRICS, right? So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa. And now, if Argentina and Iran join it, it will be a new sort of acronym. Now, these countries are not geographically proximate to each other at all. There are three countries in Asia, one in Africa, and one in Latin America or South America, whatever you want to call it. So the so-called tyranny of geography was broken by BRICS. And if you go back to BRICS, you see that there is the beginning of BRICS was in the RIC, which is Russia, India, China. This is possible because of the evolution and advancement in technology. And now that technology has advanced to a level where we are not even having physical summits. Pandemic obviously made it impossible to have physical summits, and now we've realized, the world has realized, that there are easier ways to have summits, um, which is a virtual way of doing it. The world has been working virtually for about 2-3 years now, and politicians have got on to the bandwagon. So the first summit of I2U2, or the organization that is India, Israel, UAE, and the US, was a virtual one. This is something that is unheard of, because mostly when a new organization is born, just to show the strength and solidarity with each other, just to show that, okay, this is an organization that is going to stay for long, you would have great pomp and show in its first summit. The first summit is usually the one which establishes the legitimacy of an organization, because there are enough observer members, there are enough people on this, enough members on the sidelines. And how I2U2 becomes different from all other regional organizations is very clearly that it is a very, very small organization. It has only 4 members. Now, somebody would say that BRICS only has 5 members, but then BRICS was born on the table of an economist. The common thread between BRICS nations was that there was a prediction that the economies of these nations are going to do really well, and that is why they have common threads between them. If you go a little bit back in history, you had BRICS focused MBA courses in most MBA schools, most MBA universities, colleges around the world. Wharton had an MBA course on BRICS. Oxford had an MBA course on BRICS. You had special Goldman Sachs divisions just for investments in the BRICS. So it was a purely economic sort of dream of those who wanted to invest and get great returns. Now it evolved into a platform for South-South cooperation. It evolved into a platform for something that was an alternative to the Western-dominated IMF type of narrative, and it was a paradigm shift from something that was completely Eurocentric or US-centric to a narrative that was perspectives of the global South. So BRICS evolved to have a political connotation. I2U2 does not come from any of those already established starting points. When we talk about I2U2, it is a very pointed approach. That's why that is where the concept of minilateralism comes in. Now, when we talk about multilateralism and bilateralism, bilateralism is quite easy to understand, a relationship between two countries, and multilateralism is a relationship between more than two countries. Now, this could be 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. And when you make 8 or 9 countries or a group of countries, it becomes a regional organization. Now, minilateralism comes and sits comfortably somewhere in the middle of it all, where you have a group of countries, but it is a pointed group of countries. They have only come together to look at certain things, to have a targeted approach, have set aims, and then actually achieve those targets. That is something that most organizations do not begin with. So if you look at the charters of organizations like the OAS or the UNASUR or even EU, they will talk about, vague things like enhancing people to people connect or enhancing connectivity. Now, connectivity doesn't mean anything. Connectivity means nothing till it is well defined. How do you define connectivity? You will talk about visa free entry, you will talk about direct flights. You will talk about lowering tariffs. You will talk about tax relaxations. You will talk about common bank accounts, common internet plans, common phone plans. These are things that were a part of EU. So if you are a part of the EU nations, no matter which nation you're living in, you don't have to change your bank account. You don't have to have a bank account in the national bank. You can very easily make transactions from your parent bank account and there will be no extra charges levied. Now that becomes a part of enhanced connectivity. But none of those things were actually mentioned in the charter. The what these things are, or enhanced connectivity is, or how it is manifested now, is the result of years of trial and error. Okay, so what happens is that the evolution of regional organizations or evolution of multilateralism is what we have seen till now. Now, here we've entered an era where it has become important to go into an organization knowing exactly what you want from it. And that is the reason why countries which are very unlikely to work together have come together. Israel and UAE working together is something that nobody could have thought of. Of course, you have to go back to the Abraham Accords when you talk about Israel and one of the Arab nations working together. It's something that was unthinkable, but it became a reality because after a point, countries do realize that beyond their ideological, political, historical, traditional, religious disputes, you still have a country to run. You still have an economy to take care of. You still have weapons that you must sell. You still have problems that you must solve, and those problems cannot be solved on an individual basis. That is why you have the advent of these organizations, which are purely in the most corporate, easy to understand sense of the word. Their bottom line is profit. Their bottom line is getting things done. Now, by profit, I don't mean monetary profit, but actually profiting from being in an organization together. So, if UAE and Israel are working together and that helps them solve the problem of the food crisis, then it is profit for them. Or if US and India are working together and it helps us solve a geopolitical conundrum for us, it helps us counterbalance China, then it is profit for the US and for India. So that is what I mean when I say the bottom line here is profit. So when we talk about I2U2, this is a group of 4 countries, as I mentioned, which has gone in with 6 very defined areas of cooperation that they want to look at. First is energy security, second is food security. These are 2 very important aspects which are ailing not just India, but most of the world at this point of time. And it has been the energy security problem and the food security problem has become a greater problem since the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We all understand that the gas prices are rising. Europe is on the verge of an economic collapse or a recession because the gas prices are rising that much. And if you look back in history, food crisis is something that has always been a sensitive point for Europe because it has always historically depended on Russia or what was the Soviet Union at one point of time for their supply of grain, for their supply of wheat and corn. That is the reason you had, if you go back in history, study a little bit of British history, you will have the concept of corn laws, CORN, corn laws, and that was to make sure that the British markets were not being flooded by cheap Russian grain. Europe in itself geographically is a very small area. So countries again are small, and agriculture needs, by the characteristic of their activity, it needs free open lands. If you don't have that much, you're going to use too many fertilizers, or too many hybrid varieties of grains, high yielding varieties of food crops, etc. Or you're going to depend on another country which produces grain for cheaper and export it there. If it is, if there is comparative advantage in exporting. India has another kind of food crisis going on. The problem with India is that we have too many people. Even though we have a lot of land, we don't have enough land to cater for all of these people. And especially in a developing country like India, that is going to happen in China. Also, that happens in countries of Africa and Asia and Latin America. Also, farmers tend to farm crops that give them more money. So any country, any farmer that has the resources will quickly switch to the farming of cash crops. Now, cash crops give you a lot more money, but they don't feed people. You cannot feed people cotton. You still need wheat and rice and pulses and oil seeds to feed people. And for that, either you need to either grow them yourself or you need to depend on imports from other countries. India imports everything from tomatoes to soybean from different parts of the world. And Russia is one such part. Ukraine is one such part. They are the bread bowls of the world, specifically for Asia and for Europe. So, food security became one such issue which gathered all of these countries together. The US also faces food insecurity, mostly because their agriculture is very um, uh, how do I say it in a how do I say it in a politically correct manner? Their agriculture is dominated by corporations, which means their seeds, etc., are dominated by corporations. So they do not have the liberty of keeping seeds from good plants and then replanting them and sustaining agricultural practices that are environmentally safe. So their food security problems are that most of the food that they eat is causing health issues for most of the people who eat them. So either you are rich enough to buy organic produce, or you end up getting food allergies. You end up getting massive health problems because of the kind of produce that they consume. So that is the food security that US is facing. Now, that was one part of the bigger problems. The second big problem is energy insecurity. India is not an energy secure country because simply energy resources, crude oil, natural gas, these things are geographic lotteries. Either you have them or you don't. There is no such thing unless and until you switch completely to renewable sources of energy, which have their own problems. You need massive investments. You need uh, and there is enough pollution when you actually use this energy, when you convert solar energy into usable electricity, heat, etc. We don't have that kind of technology now. Even if we do, India doesn't have that kind of investment to put in because it is transferred to the consumer. So, in energy insecurity in India is massive because we don't have the natural resources that can bide us through, that can be enough for all the people in India. Plus, the when we import oil and gas from outside, we also need to diversify our basket. So we cannot be importing oil only from Iran, or we cannot be importing oil only from Nigeria. And that is what India has tried to do now. For the past 10 years or so, India has really diversified their baskets. And we are importing oil from Nigeria, from Latin America, from Middle East. It's an open market. When you import oil, you import it on a daily basis and you go there. It's an open market. You see which one is the most um, profitable price markup on the crude oil that day, and you buy from there. Now, when you have linkages in the Middle East, India has bilateral linkages with a lot of countries of West Asia or Middle East as they are more commonly known, but we do not have a multilateral geopolitical presence there. So, with this unit, with being a part of this organization, we will definitely have a greater geopolitical presence, which means that you have more wiggle room. You have more room to conduct business, you have more room to negotiate, you have more room to make sure that your relationships are robust and alive without actually getting into trouble with other countries. So if I have a great bilateral relationship with Iran, and then I try and create a great bilateral relationship with Saudi, it becomes a problem because Saudi and Iran do not see eye to eye on anything. But if I am in I2U2, then I have the liberty to have great relationships with Israel, with the UAE at the same point of time, and then also with Iran if need be. Okay, so these things become easier when you are in a multilateral forum. So we've covered food security, we've covered energy security. Now we move on to other things. There is health, there is transport, and health and transport are easy enough to understand. India is a great country for medical tourism. It is something that ails every nation, especially nations with aging populations. So if you look at the demographic dividend of India, we still have a population that would be considered youthful. That is not true for a lot of countries and definitely not true for the US. So, and especially in the US, where medical facilities or health facilities are extremely exorbitant, most people who can travel or who can afford or who are aware of these things will travel to countries like India, countries like Vietnam, countries like China, to Malaysia, where you have cheaper healthcare and also you get great post operative care. So, India becomes a priority when it comes to health. There is also transport and connectivity together. Now, transport and connectivity is fairly easy to understand. You need to have direct flights, you need to have direct connectivity with each other, and basic infrastructure. Then connectivity is also not just like I said in the beginning. There are also talks about making it easier for people to travel. So if we look at it from a more philosophical point of view, never have human beings traveled in such great numbers or migrated in such great numbers from one place to another in the history of humankind than they are doing right now. Especially when it comes to India and the Middle East or India and West Asia, we all know that the amount of Indian diaspora in Gulf countries is immense. And usually that diaspora is sadly underrepresented in the political spectrum. They are not the most economically and politically solid people. And for that matter, India does need greater connectivity with the Middle East. India does need easier access. So making sure that that connectivity is there and making sure that transport is there are things that are important. So when we are looking at all of these issues, whether it's energy, whether it's food, whether it's connectivity, health, transport, you see that these are very pointed issues. These are very targeted problems or problem questions that countries collectively are finding answers to. And that is something that makes it different from traditional multilateral forums or traditional regional groupings. So that was the one thing that made it different. The second thing was these are not an easy bunch of countries for them to work together. Okay. So these are countries that already have historical disputes, that already have not looked eye to eye in a traditional sense. Them coming together also is emblematic of the fact that countries have started thinking in a different manner. Where, somebody has said that all politics is domestic. And when you apply that to the foreign policy of a country, you have to say that foreign policy is based on national interests. Whether it is short term national interests or long term goals, the priority of your foreign policy must be to fulfill your national interests. And to fulfill your national interests in a most realist perspective, if you have to work together or cooperate or collaborate with a country that is sorry, kindly put in place your mic. Can you not hear me all right?
Your audio is perfect, ma'am.
Okay. Somebody messaged me. I think maybe
Might be a technical issue, ma'am. Might be a connectivity issue, but your audio is quite clear at our end.
okay, thank you. So, like I was saying, that your national interest should be your first priority, even when it comes to your foreign policy. And your foreign policy must reflect that. So, in case you need to be in a collaborative effort with a country that you have traditional disputes with, you still need to work around them so that your national interests are met. And that is something that we saw in the Abraham Accords, and now we see again in I2U2, where an Arab nation, the UAE, and Israel are working together, something that has not happened in 5,000 years. And um, I'm not using 5,000 years as a hyperbole. 5,000 years really. The difference or the conflict between the two Abrahamic religions, Islam and Judaism, is very old. And that is what is manifested between the countries of Israel and the Arab nations. So, them coming together and working together just because their priority is to fulfill a national interest is great. The second part is that the third issue here is that I2U2 gives great access to the US, um, great access to the US to the Middle East again, without the US having to guarantee some sort of military, you know, some sort of military, collective military action, which means that they are no longer making military allies. So, like we all know, that Saudi Arabia is a US ally. Similarly, US has gotten into the Middle East uh, for um, for armed intervention quite a number of times. Now, this I2U2 does not require the US to do that at all. And after what happened in Afghanistan, Biden is not looking to get into another armed conflict abroad at all. So this is a very safe option for US to continue their association and their geopolitical dominance of the region without without the concept of military at all. So that is one thing. For India, again, it is a geopolitically advantageous move because it gives you great access to the Middle East. It gives you negotiating room to the Middle East. With the Middle East, it gives you um, enough access to all the ports or the routes of oil dispensation, and they are always open to you. So what we see is I2U2 is an organization where these four countries have come together to make sure that they all fulfill their national interests, and at the same time they can collectively do some good for each other. And that is what you can expect from an organization like this. Now, I am not speculating that that is how the evolution is going to be for regional organizations. It might not be. This is an experiment. It is going to become clear to us whether it works or it doesn't work in the next 5 years at least. We will have to give it at least 3 to 5 years to A, establish themselves, B, actually get some work done, and C, to realize whether countries allow this to happen or not. Because whenever countries get into a regional organization, a multilateral organization, a bilateral relationship, there is always that traditional question of whether we are giving away too much sovereignty. So, any sort of, how would I say, extra national organization, any sort of organization that makes you a member, makes your nation or your state a member of a bigger organization, is also a threat to your national sovereignty, because you have to act in ways that might not be your first choice. You have to let up your authority, give up some of your authority to be a part of such and such organization. That is where that traditional question comes in. So whether this trend survives or whether this organization survives depends on whether these four countries, find it actually advantageous in the next 5 years, or they realize that maybe it's not advantageous at all, maybe it is a redundant organization. It could also be that the trend changes and organizations lose their significance the moment their targets are achieved. Because if their targets don't evolve with changing geopolitics, they are going to become redundant very, very quickly. And that is expensive. That's an expensive affair for any member country to be in an organization for 3 years and then let it go, let it die off. And how do you let it die off? These are things that have not been explored or executed. There are no standards of procedure set up for dying organizations, for organizations becoming redundant. So this is an experiment, and we should look at it as an experiment and let it and constantly assess it. And in the next 5 years we should have a definitive answer whether minilateralism is here to stay or not. I think that is where I will end my discussion. I was given about 35 minutes, and I'll open the floor to any questions from all of you.
Yes, ma'am. It was great. It was productive and even informative. I'm an economics student and I felt more relatable with comparative advantage and even the issues you were raised about Israel and Australia. So I felt more connected. I hope even the audience got connected to it. And it's very relevant in today's geopolitics. So we have few questions, ma'am, from other social media pages like Live and Facebook, Instagram. So the first question is, how will I2U2 help balance China's expanding role in the Middle East?
So, some people actually said that I2U2 is the Western Quad. Now, I don't really think that is true. China is expanding in the Middle East, specifically economically. China has great relations with Israel, and it has even greater presence in the Arab world. US is not has not talked about balancing China with the I2U2 at all. We are doing that in the Indian Ocean. We are doing that in the Asia Pacific region with NATO, with the Quad, with AUKUS, with the new IPEF, which is on the face of it an economic organization, but it has no economic goals written in the charter at all. So if you look at IPF, etc., these are basically there to balance China. Um, at this point of time, I2U2 cannot balance out China because China has great commercial relations with two of the members, and those members are not willing to completely either stop their relations, put a stop to their relations or their trade with China. Neither are they willing to lower their trade, their commerce or their transactions with China. So this is not an organization in West Asia trying to counterbalance China. Maybe that becomes an aim in another year or two. But at this point of time, I don't see that happening at all.
Yes, ma'am, definitely. Since geoeconomics is interlinked with geopolitics,
Any
what
other
can be the possible economic implications for I2U2 due to volatile geopolitics in the Middle East?
I'm sorry, since geoeconomics is interlinked with geopolitics, what? I couldn't hear
Uh,
after that.
yes, ma'am, I'll repeat it. Since geopolitics can't be separated from geoeconomics, what can be the possible economic implications for I2U2 due to the volatile geopolitics in the Middle East?
So that's what I talked about. That I2U2 has very focused goals, and the problem with geopolitics in the Middle East is that it has been volatile since the beginning of time. you cannot say that it will suddenly become volatile now. It's still volatile. There is still a war going on in Yemen. There is still a war that is about to happen between Ethiopia and Saudi. There are still problems with Iran. Israel is still a state which is heavily militarized and which has border skirmishes or um, armed conflict or whatever it is, whatever euphemism you want to use with its neighbors. But that has not stopped any sort of economic growth of the region. If you look at UAE or if you look at the Emirates, they are some of the most prosperous regions in the world, prosperous countries in the world, primarily because of the oil that they have. But no organizations have died because there is geopolitical trouble. Economics has become the mainstay of states and state relations since globalization became a thing. Everybody wants oil, everybody wants power. Oil is not, people are not going to stop importing oil, and people are not going to now, countries do not want instability either within their state or around their state because it makes it difficult to conduct business. So I don't think there will be too much trouble. Plus, there is no such thing that has been, there is no such trade relation that has been established as of now that depends too much on the geography of the Middle East. There is no pipeline coming from Israel to India. There is no pipeline going from Israel to the UAE. There is no trade route that has been set up between India and the Gulf. So when tangible things don't happen, when tangible infrastructure is not set up, then to disrupt commercial relations, it becomes difficult to disrupt commercial relations. Only tangible efforts that have been already put are food parks and integrated solar panel hubs, which are already in India. So when the tangible manifestation of something is happening in a country which is not riddled with instability, I don't think it should be a problem that there is a geopolitical instability in the Gulf or in the Arab world. It's not going to hamper I2U2 too much.
Yes, ma'am. There is one more question regarding India's diaspora in I2U2. So it says that can we say I2U2 will benefit India the most because of our vast diaspora presence in the region and the look west policy?
I don't think you can say that it will benefit India the most, because how do you quantify that benefit? If I say no, it is going to benefit India more than it is going to benefit US, that's a very strange comparison to make, because we are all going in with different objectives. So as long as my objectives are being met and the other objectives are also being met, then it's a mutually beneficial situation. There is no competition in a regional organization or in an organization like this, that this setting or this how do I say, this transaction must benefit me more than it benefits other members. No, that was not the objective of this. So it will benefit India in in the terms of meeting our objectives. As far as the diaspora goes, I think the benefit there is that we get greater connectivity. So you have more flights going in, going out, you have easier visa processes. Hopefully, that is not guaranteed as of now, but hopefully, you have easier visa processes. Um, I think it would still be almost an audacious dream to think that you would have better living and working conditions for the Indian diaspora abroad, especially in the Gulf. That is not a truth for South Asian diaspora at all in the Middle East. But if that gets better, I think that would be great for India. But I'm not too hopeful about it. Like I began this answer. As long as all countries benefit, it's great. This is not a competition of making the most amount of profit. I don't think that you can actually quantify which country benefits the most out of this organization.
Yes, ma'am. There is an add-on question for this about question as well. Like it is about the strategic and defense benefits that India might reap from this grouping, especially because it is called West Asia Quad. So, how do you first
So,
quantify
like
this?
I said, that the name that has been given is I2U2. That is the official name. Somebody was calling it a West Asian Quad because it has four members, hence a quadrilateral organization. That's it. It does not actually share any of its ambitions with the actual Quad that we have in the Asia Pacific. As far as strategic benefits go, I think I've described them in detail, that we will have greater guarantee of an energy supply. We have food security to look after, that is also going to be met. We will have infrastructure, connectivity, transport. These basic six issues being met because of this. Defense, India has not signed any agreement talking about defense exports. We already import defense equipment and arms related products from Israel. We have some from the US coming in, and we still depend majoritarily on Russian imports. So I don't see that changing anytime soon, because mostly because our armed forces are used to Russian products. We already have agreements in place, long-term agreements in place that get either annual or biannual renewals. And whenever you are talking about arms exports, it's a comparative advantage thing. It's a cost benefit analysis. So if you're going to benefit from importing it from another country, better product, cheaper prices, you're going to do that. Otherwise, you're going to import it from your traditional arms exporter, which is Russia itself. So, as far as strategic benefits go, I have listed them out quite well, I believe. As far as defense benefits go, not about defense imports. We are not looking at that at all.
Okay, ma'am. So, although it is currently economic opportunities related to all other regions, but do you see anything in future for I2U2 extending areas for cooperation on a militaristic level?
On a militaristic level, I would say that we could have better exports from Israel. As far as so if you look at military coalition or military alliances, India has not been a part of military alliances. We don't have a collective military alliance group with any country. So we are not going to find, at this point of time, I can definitively say that we are not going to sign a pact which says that if any country of the I2U2 gets into a warlike situation, India is going to send their army. That is not how India functions. So I don't think there is military cooperation in the future. Of course, there could be joint military exercises. There could be greater defense trade. There could be defense cooperation, but not a collective military pact.
Yes, ma'am. So, there is one more question regarding West Asia and all. So, how beneficial do you think I2U2 will be opening a window for India to play a greater global role with an enhanced profile in West Asia?
See, India is already working on a greater global role. That is something that has been an Indian ambition since our independence. We have always projected an image to the world that is greater than our capabilities, that is greater than the present capabilities. Okay. That was greater than the present capabilities in 1947, that is greater than the present capabilities in 2022. So, a great or a bigger role in global politics is something that is characteristic of Indian foreign policy. When we talk about greater role in the Middle East or West Asia, that is definitely definitely a possibility. I think I've talked about it during the lecture, that it gives India a nice negotiation room where you can talk to multiple countries of the Gulf without angering one over the other. So there is no problem of traditional disputes. There is no problem of maneuvering through their geopolitical dynamics, their bilateral dynamics, to fulfill your own requirements. So that is where we are going to have an advantage. Obviously, there is going to be an enhanced role in the Gulf because you become a part of a group which has two countries of the Middle East. So that is where the enhanced role comes in. We are not trying to become an influencing force in the Middle East at all. We are not trying to become a part of their domestic politics at all. We, again, like I said, it is a very pointed approach. We are going to go there, make sure that our targets are met, and then see how it evolves. At this point of time, I2U2 is not looking at a greater geopolitical presence. It is not looking at a greater political significance. It is not looking to be a voice of the global south. It is just looking to cooperate and collaborate so that their targets, which are pointed, can be met for each of the countries.
Yes, ma'am. And there is a last question, like it's an opinionated one. So, in your opinion, should the mechanism be expanded to include other countries at this stage?
If other countries want to be a part of I2U2, and if the member states, the original member states, agree to that, then it can become a bigger organization. But that sort of defeats the purpose of a mini-lateral organization. If you have 11 countries becoming member states, that targeted approach it cannot be adopted, because you're going to have different countries with different agendas, with different traditional disputes, and becomes a bigger mess. So, if you're going to have more countries, you need a bigger organization. You need to have a longer approach to things. You need to plan in much longer terms. You need to look at an organization that is almost immune from subtle geopolitical changes, which at this point of time I2U2 is not. So I don't see more countries joining in, at least for the next 2 years. After 2 years, what happens, we'll have to see.
Yes, ma'am. So this is the end of the questions, and if audience has anything, they can ping in the chat box or contact the ma'am via her mail ID or contact number. And I would like to request Siddhartha sir to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Kasuma. I'll take this opportunity to thank our expert resource person for this webinar, Dr. Aprajita Pandey ma'am, for her highly informative session on advent of I2U2 and the era of minilateralism. Certainly, the advent of I2U2 is something which is very novel and is keenly watched by geopolitical enthusiasts, including us. I sincerely hope that all our participants attending this session from Google Meet and YouTube Live must have learned immensely. And we thank you, ma'am, for your great and in detailed presentation over this subject, along with the enriching question and answers session. I'll also like to thank our founder, Mr. Abhishek Ranjan, who not only established Red Lantern Analytica as a think tank, but also guides us every time during organization of an event like today. I'd also like to thank our participants for their involvement, who make all the sessions interactive by asking their relevant questions. With these words, on the behalf of the whole team of Red Lantern Analytica, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude to all the academicians, research scholars, and participants who joined us today, and to our guest speaker as well, ma'am. Once again, thank you to you for taking out time from your busy schedule and making this session possible in the first place. With your due permission now, ma'am, we can bring this session to a close.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to. It was a great opportunity for me to interact with all of you, and yeah, thank you so much. It was a great session. I look
It
forward to
was
doing.
absolutely a pleasure at our end also, ma'am, to host you, and we do look forward for more such events to be organized by us, wherein we can invite you as a guest speaker, ma'am.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, Randan sir, and thank you, Kusuma, and thank you for
Thank you,
everybody
ma'am.
who attended.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll now bring this session to a close.